A scarred female is worse than a dead one, my sister laughed as she locked me away. But when the most dangerous alpha in the world finally found me, he didn't see an ugly, broken girl. He kissed my bleeding face and whispered, "I am going to make them all pay." Welcome to Luna's Secret Library. On this channel, you can enjoy all sorts of romantic love stories. If you like my stories, please subscribe to my channel for more wonderful tales. The pain in my left cheek burned like hot coals. Caroline had dragged the sharp edge of her diamond ring across my face just an hour ago. Blood continuously dripped from my chin and stained my torn linen dress. She wanted me ugly and broken for the mating ceremony. She specifically wanted Alpha Harrison to look at her tonight, not me. My wicked older sister always took whatever she desired. Tonight, she desired the most powerful and feared alpha in the Northern Territories. I pressed my aching back against the cold stone wall of the underground cellar. The heavy oak floorboards above me rattled with the sound of a live orchestra. The grand ballroom was currently filled with hundreds of eligible females. I was locked down here in the freezing dark alongside the rats. My ruined face throbbed with a sickening, relentless rhythm. Caroline had maliciously scrubbed fireplace soot into my fresh, bleeding cuts. She leaned into my ear and told me a scarred female was worse than a dead one. She laughed a cruel, high-pitched laugh as she turned the heavy iron key in the lock. Now, the tantalizing scent of roasted meats and expensive perfumes drifted down the cellar stairs. I wrapped my trembling arms tightly around my shivering shoulders. I was only 19 years old, but I felt my entire life was already over. A sudden, terrifying hush fell over the ceiling directly above me. The lively music stopped so abruptly it left a ringing in my ears. Heavy, dominant footsteps suddenly echoed like thunder on the marble floor. Alpha Harrison had officially arrived at the estate. Every single wolf in the territory knew his brutal reputation. He was ruthless, fiercely cold, and completely undefeated in pack wars. He was here tonight looking for a strong mate to secure his ruling lineage. Caroline had spent 6 hours weaving luminous pearls into her golden hair. She was currently wearing my late mother's stolen crimson silk gown. I closed my eyes and let a single, bitter tear fall. The salt from my tear viciously stung my ruined, open cheek. Suddenly, a deep, earth-shattering growl vibrated through the very foundation of the house. It was a terrifying sound that made my inner wolf whimper in my chest. It was an ancient, primal call that demanded immediate submission. The floorboards creaked loudly as massive boots walked deliberately across the ballroom. The footsteps strangely did not stop at the center of the grand room. They completely bypassed the breathless, eager whispers of the noble ladies. They completely ignored Caroline's sweet, calculated, artificial laughter. The heavy footsteps moved purposefully toward the back servants' hallway. They were heading straight and unyielding for the hidden cellar door. My breath violently hitched in my dry throat. I crawled frantically further into the damp, spider-filled shadows. I absolutely could not let anyone from the pack see me like this. I was a bruised, battered, and horrifyingly ugly thing right now. The heavy iron lock above my head rattled violently. Thick wood splintered with a deafening, explosive crack. Someone had just brutally kicked the solid cellar door entirely off its iron hinges. Dust fell like dirty snow from the wooden ceiling above me. Heavy, military-style boots slowly and rhythmically descended the wooden stairs. The intense scent of winter pine, sharp ice, and raw, suffocating power flooded the cramped space. It was the unmistakable, overpowering scent of a true alpha. My heart hammered against my bruised ribs like a trapped, desperate bird. I pressed my bloody, swollen face hard against my knees to hide my shame. Please do not look at me. Please just turn around and walk away. The heavy footsteps stopped exactly 3 feet in front of my shivering body. A terrifying, heavy silence completely filled the dark cellar. I could hear his deep, controlled, predatory breathing. "Look at me," a deep, gravelly voice commanded in the dark. It was not a polite request or a simple question. It was a raw alpha command that physically forced my chin to lift against my will. I trembled violently as my tear-filled eyes finally met his. Alpha Harrison stood towering over me in the incredibly dim, flickering light. His impossibly broad shoulders completely blocked out the light from the stairs behind him. His sharp, aristocratic jaw was visibly clenched tight with tension. His piercing, storm-gray eyes locked instantly onto my bruised and bleeding face. He clearly saw the dark soot rubbed into my wounds. He clearly saw the jagged, bleeding cuts tearing across my cheek. He clearly saw the ugly, purple swelling blooming around my left eye. I waited agonizingly for pure disgust to twist his handsome, structured features. I waited for him to scoff and immediately turn away in horror. Instead, the most feared alpha in the territory dropped slowly to one knee. The sheer fabric of his incredibly expensive black suit brushed the filthy, blood-stained floor. He raised a surprisingly large, heavily calloused hand toward my ruined face. I flinched violently, expecting another harsh blow. His large hand froze instantly in mid-air at my reaction. A low, dangerous, rumbling sound slowly echoed deep within his broad chest. It was a sound that made the very air in the cellar vibrate. It was not a sound directed at me. It was pure, unadulterated, world-ending murderous rage. "Who," he whispered, his voice shaking with absolute, terrifying fury, "did this to my mate?" I could not breathe. I could not process the impossible word he had just spoken. Mate. He called me his mate. The most powerful alpha in the world was claiming a broken, scarred girl in a dirty cellar. His grey eyes softened for a fraction of a second as he looked at my trembling lips. Then, the softness vanished, replaced by a lethal, glowing gold ring around his pupils. His inner wolf was rising to the surface, demanding blood for my pain. He gently took off his expensive suit jacket. He carefully wrapped the warm fabric around my freezing, trembling shoulders. His scent of pine and ice wrapped around me like a protective shield. For the first time in my miserable life, I felt entirely safe. But the house above us was not safe. Caroline was still upstairs, waiting for a man who now wanted to tear her apart. Alpha Harrison slowly stood back up to his full, terrifying height. He did not offer me his hand yet. He knew I was too fragile to walk on my own. Instead, he effortlessly scooped me up into his massive, muscular arms. I gasped as my head fell against his broad, warm chest. His heartbeat was steady, loud, and incredibly soothing against my ear. "Do not close your eyes yet, little one," he murmured softly into my hair. "I want you to stay awake for what happens next." He turned his gaze toward the splintered wooden stairs leading back up to the ballroom. "I am going to make them all pay," he promised with a deadly, quiet calm. "And we are going to start with the female wearing the crimson gown." He carried me out of the shadows and began the slow, heavy walk up the stairs. The blinding light of the crystal chandeliers pierced my swollen eyes as Alpha Harrison carried me into the grand ballroom. The silence in the massive hall was so absolute that the sound of my blood dripping onto the polished marble floor echoed like a ticking clock. Hundreds of noble elites parted instantly, pressing themselves against the gold-leafed walls, absolutely terrified to even breathe near the furious Alpha. His tall, incredibly strong frame moved with the lethal grace of an apex predator stalking his prey. His closely cropped short hair gave his sharp, ruthlessly handsome face an even more dangerous, commanding military-like authority. I buried my ruined, bleeding face deeper into the warm, expensive fabric of his suit jacket, trembling uncontrollably under the intense stares of the entire territory. Caroline stood dead center under the largest chandelier, radiating a sickeningly confident glow in my mother's stolen crimson silk gown. A triumphant, arrogant smile was still frozen on her perfectly painted lips, completely unaware of the storm about to destroy her. She took a graceful step forward, mistakenly believing the Alpha had retrieved a wounded servant to show his benevolent strength. "Alpha Harrison," she purred, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and practiced charm. "Whatever is the matter with that poor, wretched creature you are holding?" She elegantly placed a hand on her chest, pretending to be deeply concerned while secretly hoping he would throw me away into the dirt. Harrison did not stop walking until he was standing merely 2 feet away from my wicked sister. The terrifying aura radiating from his massive body caused several weaker members in the room to involuntarily drop to their knees in submission. He stared down at Caroline with eyes so violently cold and stormy they looked like freezing steel. "A wretched creature," his deep, gravelly voice rumbled dangerously through the painfully quiet ballroom. He slowly shifted his heavily muscled arms, gently turning me just enough so that my bruised, blooded face was fully exposed to the blinding light of the crystal chandeliers. A collective gasp of sheer horror ripped through the elegant crowd of nobles as they finally recognized who I was beneath the dirt and blood. Caroline's fake, polite smile completely vanished, instantly replaced by a pale mask of absolute panic and raw disbelief. Her eyes darted wildly from my ruined face to the terrifyingly calm Alpha holding me against his broad chest. "Amelia," she stuttered, her voice cracking as she desperately tried to maintain her elegant composure in front of the elites. "Sister, what on earth happened to you down in that dark, filthy cellar?" She was actually trying to play the innocent, deeply concerned sibling in front of the most powerful man in our entire world. A low, vibrating growl ripped from Harrison's chest, a sound so purely lethal it made the expensive crystal glasses on the tables vibrate and shatter. "Do not dare to call her your sister," he commanded softly, yet the absolute, unquestionable authority in his tone made Caroline physically flinch. "My mate is no kin to a jealous monster who bathes in deceit and cruelty." The incredible word mate echoed through the silent room like a cannon shot, instantly destroying Caroline's grand, foolish delusion. The beautiful crimson gown suddenly looked like a cheap, stolen rag on her trembling body as the horrifying reality of his words finally crushed her spirit. She nervously rubbed her hands together, a fatal mistake that immediately drew Harrison's predatory gaze directly to her left hand. His storm-grey eyes locked intensely onto the large, sharp diamond ring glittering violently on her shaking finger. Even from this considerable distance, his heightened alpha senses could clearly detect the fresh, metallic scent of my blood trapped beneath the expensive gem. "You smell of her pain," he stated, his voice dropping into a deadly, terrifying whisper that promised absolute, unstoppable destruction. "You wear her mother's dress, you try to steal her rightful place in the light, and you proudly wear my mate's innocent blood on your treacherous hands." Caroline began to shake violently, stepping backward as the terrifying weight of the Alpha's pure murderous intent pressed down upon her. She opened her mouth to spout another desperate, pathetic lie, but her voice completely failed her. Harrison did not raise his voice, nor did he make a wild, aggressive movement. His power was absolute and required no cheap theatrics. "Guards," he spoke into the suffocating silence, his tone completely stripped of any warmth, mercy, or hesitation. For massive, heavily armed enforcers stepped out from the dark shadows of the ballroom, their heads bowed in total submission to his will. "Strip this female of her noble title, confiscate the crimson gown she has wrongfully defiled, and banish her from the Central Territory immediately." Caroline let out a piercing, hysterical scream, falling hard to her knees and begging wildly for a shred of mercy she had never once shown me. I closed my single good eye, completely overwhelmed by the sudden, dizzying rush of justice that I never thought I would live to witness. The tall Alpha held me even tighter against his incredibly muscular chest, pressing a surprisingly gentle, reverent kiss to the top of my soot-covered hair. "It is over, little one," he murmured softly, his breath warm and incredibly soothing against my trembling scalp, completely ignoring the screaming woman being aggressively dragged away by the guards. He turned his strong back on the stunned crowd, his powerful arms carrying me toward a bright future I could have never dared to dream of. The pain burning across my face was still agonizing, but for the very first time in 19 miserable years, the dark shadows had finally been chased away. He walked gracefully out of the grand ballroom with the exact same dominant, unhurried pace he had used when he first entered it. The massive oak doors slammed heavily shut behind us, completely cutting off the pathetic, desperate screams of the cruel woman who had tormented me for years. The cool, crisp night air immediately hit my flushed, feverish skin as we stepped out onto the grand stone balcony overlooking his vast estate. A sleek, heavily armored black vehicle was already waiting at the bottom of the grand sweeping staircase, its powerful engine purring quietly in the absolute dark. Harrison's personal beater, a stoic, broad-shouldered man with a heavily scarred face, immediately opened the rear door and bowed his head respectfully. The loyal beater did not look at my ruined, bloody face with disgust. He only showed absolute, unwavering reverence for the scarred female his alpha had chosen to claim. Harrison carefully lowered himself into the spacious back seat of the vehicle, utterly refusing to let me go or place me down on the leather cushions. He kept me securely settled on his lap, his strong, unyielding arms forming an unbreakable fortress around my battered, exhausted body. Drive directly to the private estate, he ordered his beater, his deep, rumbling voice leaving no room for questions or delays of any kind. And summon the absolute best medical team in the region immediately. I want them waiting right at the door when we arrive. As the heavy vehicle smoothly pulled away from the terrifying nightmare of my past, I finally allowed myself to completely surrender to the crushing exhaustion. I rested my aching head against his solid shoulder, enveloped entirely by his comforting scent of winter pine and raw, protective power. The heavy armored vehicle glided smoothly to a halt in front of a sprawling, magnificent stone mansion. Even in my exhausted, pain-filled haze, the sheer scale of Alpha Harrison's private estate was absolutely breathtaking. I had lived my entire life locked away in the forgotten corners of my own home, treated as nothing more than a useless burden. Now, I was being carried through towering oak double doors into a grand foyer that smelled of expensive beeswax and fresh winter pine. True to his command, a team of serious-looking medical professionals was already lined up and waiting near the entrance. They bowed their heads respectfully as Harrison strode past them, his powerful arms still holding me securely against his broad, muscular chest. He did not pause to offer them any greetings. He simply barked a curt order for the head doctor to follow him immediately to the private medical wing. The medical room was blindingly white and smelled sharply of strong antiseptics. It made my heart race with sudden, primal anxiety. Harrison gently lowered me onto the edge of a pristine examination bed, but he absolutely refused to step back. The head physician, an older female with kind eyes, stepped forward cautiously. She carefully began to wipe away the thick, dark soot and dried blood that Caroline had cruelly rubbed into my fresh wounds. The sudden, biting sting of the cleaning alcohol made me violently flinch. I squeezed my eyes shut, my trembling hands gripping the edge of the mattress until my knuckles turned completely white. Harrison noticed my distress instantly. He stepped closer, his tall, imposing frame blocking out the harsh overhead lights. He took my small, shaking hand in his large, calloused one, offering a silent, grounding strength that helped me breathe through the agonizing pain. The lacerations are quite deep, Alpha, the doctor finally murmured, her voice filled with quiet professional regret as she applied a cooling, soothing salve to my cheek. We can prevent any severe infection, and the swelling will certainly go down soon. However, given the jagged nature of the cuts caused by the diamond ring, there will almost certainly be permanent scarring on her left side. The doctor's words hit me harder than a physical blow. Permanent scarring. The terrifying reality of my situation crashed down upon me all at once. I was sitting in the luxurious home of the most powerful, undefeated alpha in the entire Northern Territory. He was a man who could easily have any flawless, aristocratic female he desired. And I was now permanently disfigured. A surge of hot, bitter shame flooded my chest. I forcefully pulled my hand out of Harrison's grip and desperately turned my ruined face away from him. I wanted to sink into the floor and disappear forever. You should send me back to the outer villages, I whispered, my voice breaking with unshed tears. I am ruined now. An alpha of your high status cannot present a scarred, ugly female as his rightful Luna. The pack will never accept me. A heavy, dangerous silence descended upon the medical wing. The doctor quickly packed up her supplies and silently slipped out of the room, sensing the intense shift in the alpha's aura. Harrison did not yell, nor did he lose his temper. Instead, he slowly sat down on the edge of the bed right beside me. The mattress dipped significantly under his immense weight. He reached out, his movements incredibly slow and deliberate, and gently guided my face back toward him. His storm gray eyes were fiercely intense, burning with a mix of raw possessiveness and deep, protective warmth. His closely cropped short hair emphasized the hard, unyielding lines of his aristocratic jaw as he stared directly into my tear-filled eyes. Listen to me very carefully, Amelia, Harrison rumbled, his deep voice vibrating through my very bones. My wolf did not choose a pretty porcelain doll to sit on a glass shelf. My wolf chose a survivor. He chose your spirit, your resilience, and your pure soul. He raised his hand and, with feather-light gentleness, traced the air just above the thick bandages on my cheek. These marks are not a sign of ugliness. They are the visible proof that you survived a monster. They are a testament to your quiet strength. If any single member of my pack dares to question your worth or look at you with anything less than absolute respect, I will personally tear their throat out. He leaned forward and pressed a warm, lingering kiss to my uninjured temple. The touch sent a cascade of soothing, electric sparks right down to my toes, instantly calming the panicked whimpers of my inner wolf. You are my destined mate, he promised with absolute, terrifying certainty. You will rest and heal. But soon, I will stand you before the entire territory. They will bow to you, not because of how you look, but because you are mine. For the first time, looking into his steady, unwavering eyes, I actually began to believe him. The deep, agonizing wounds on my face still throbbed violently, but the much older, deeper wounds in my heart were finally beginning to close. I woke up to the unfamiliar feeling of incredibly soft silk sheets resting against my bare arms. The vast master bedroom was completely empty and suffocatingly quiet in the pale morning light. Alpha Harrison had been forced to leave the estate long before the sun even began to rise. Caroline's powerful aristocratic family was already threatening a devastating trade embargo to protest her sudden banishment. He needed to personally crush their pathetic rebellion at the northern border before it could spread. He had left for elite guards stationed directly outside my heavy oak door for my absolute protection. However, physical guards could not stop the insidious political warfare of the high-ranking pack nobility. I heard the heavy, arrogant footsteps echoing down the marble hallway long before the door swung open. 3 elderly men wearing the traditional dark crimson robes of the Council of Elders marched directly into my private sanctuary. They completely ignored the furious protests of my assigned medical staff. The guards at the door had been forced to step aside, forbidden by ancient law from striking a ruling elder. The leader of the group was Elder Silas, a viciously proud man with cold eyes and a cruel sneer. He stopped at the foot of my enormous bed, looking at my bandaged face as if I were a piece of rotting garbage. So this is the broken, damaged creature that has temporarily clouded our Alpha's legendary judgment, Silas mocked openly. You bring nothing but absolute shame and weakness to the most powerful bloodline in the Northern Territories. Our enemies will laugh when they see a scarred, pathetic servant sitting on the majestic Luna's throne. He threw a heavy leather pouch filled with solid gold coins directly onto my pristine white blanket. Take this generous fortune, pack whatever rags you own, and leave the central estate before he returns. In the past, these terrifying men would have easily made me drop to my knees in absolute terror. I would have simply taken the money, cried quietly, and vanished back into the dark shadows where I belonged. But the phantom warmth of Harrison's protective kiss from last night still lingered vividly on my bruised skin. He had boldly claimed that his inner wolf chose a resilient survivor, not a fragile porcelain doll. I slowly pushed the heavy silk blankets aside and swung my bare legs over the edge of the mattress. I did not reach up to frantically hide the ugly, visible bandages covering my ruined left cheek. I stood up completely straight, forcing myself to meet Elder Silas's cruel gaze with unflinching, ice-cold defiance. A scarred face only proves that an enemy tried to completely break me, and they miserably failed, I stated clearly. My voice was surprisingly steady, lacking any trace of the pathetic, trembling girl I used to be. But what exactly does a hidden ledger of stolen pack funds prove about you, Elder Silas? The cruel, arrogant sneer vanished from the old man's face in an absolute instant. The other two elders suddenly shifted uncomfortably, exchanging deeply panicked, wide-eyed glances. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, embracing the quiet, deadly power I never knew I possessed. When you spend 19 years scrubbing floors as an invisible, ignored servant, you tend to hear things, I continued softly. For example, I know that your highly praised northern silver mines have been completely empty for months. I know you have been secretly borrowing heavily from enemy packs to cover your massive, humiliating financial failures. Silas turned the color of chalk, his trembling hands violently clutching the edges of his dark crimson robes. If Alpha Harrison discovers that you have been compromising our pack's security for your own greed, he will execute you. He will not just strip you of your noble title, he will mount your arrogant head on the estate walls. So, tell me again, Elder Silas, who exactly is bringing the real shame and weakness to this territory? The entire room plunged into a suffocating, terrifying silence so deep I could hear my own heart beating. The three powerful men were completely paralyzed, thoroughly destroyed by a girl they had just called garbage. They suddenly realized I was not a weak, weeping victim waiting desperately for a man to save her. I was a deeply dangerous, calculating female who knew exactly where all their darkest secrets were buried. I slowly picked up the heavy leather pouch of gold coins and tossed it effortlessly back at his feet. Take your pathetic bribe and get out of my private chambers before I decide to tell my mate everything. Silas did not dare to utter a single word of protest or defiance. He scrambled backward, nearly tripping over his own expensive robes in his desperate rush to escape my presence. The three defeated men practically ran out of the massive bedroom, slamming the heavy door shut behind them. I let out a long, shaky breath, my knees suddenly feeling incredibly weak from the massive adrenaline rush. I was wondering how long it would take for you to finally bare your teeth, my beautiful Luna. The deep, rumbling, incredibly familiar voice sent a massive jolt of electricity straight down my spine. I whipped my head around to see Alpha Harrison casually leaning against the doorframe of the attached balcony. He must have completely bypassed the front gates and climbed the stone exterior of the mansion to avoid detection. His tailored military uniform was slightly dusted with snow, and his broad chest heaved from a rapid journey. But his storm-gray eyes were burning with a level of intense, predatory heat that nearly stole the oxygen from my lungs. He had clearly heard every single word of my ruthless, calculated confrontation with the powerful council. He did not look angry that I had handled his pack's politics without his explicit permission. He looked completely mesmerized, absolutely obsessed, and violently proud of the woman standing before him. He pushed off the door frame and slowly closed the distance between us with heavy, deliberate, dominant strides. He did not treat me like a fragile, broken thing that needed to be shielded from the harsh world anymore. He dropped smoothly to one knee right in front of me, taking my trembling hand and pressing it against his racing heart. You have no idea how incredibly dangerous and magnificent you look right now, he whispered fiercely. The absolute reverence in his powerful voice made my soul sing a wild, ancient song of pure victory. I had survived the suffocating darkness, and now I was finally learning exactly how to rule the light. The devastating retaliation from Caroline's powerful noble family arrived much faster than anyone had anticipated. They aggressively severed all vital supply lines leading directly into Alpha Harrison's Grand Central estate. Heavy, blinding snowstorms were already sweeping ruthlessly across the vast northern territories. Without the massive shipments of winter fuel and essential medical supplies, the lower-ranking pack members would quickly freeze. The arrogant Council of Elders secretly encouraged this cruel, unforgiving economic embargo. They desperately wanted the starving servants to riot and publicly blame their intense suffering on the scarred, useless new mate. Pure panic began to spread like a toxic, unstoppable virus through the sprawling stone kitchens and icy outdoor courtyards. Harrison's elite military forces were incredibly lethal and entirely undefeated in open physical combat. However, absolute brute strength could not magically summon warm food and burning coal from the frozen, barren earth. He stood silently by the massive frost-covered window, his broad, muscular shoulders tense with the heavy weight of leadership. His neat, military-style short hair caught the dim, fading afternoon light as he mentally calculated an impossible war strategy. I quietly watched the deep lines of stress and anger form around his sharp, ruthlessly handsome jawline. He was fully prepared to march his entire army south and slaughter Caroline's entire treacherous family to secure the supplies. But starting a massive, bloody pack war would immediately result in thousands of innocent widows and orphaned pups. I absolutely could not allow my personal revenge to destroy the very foundation of his majestic, historic territory. I softly placed my small hand on his thick, incredibly muscular forearm to gently interrupt his dark, violent thoughts. I told him I knew exactly how to save the estate from starvation without shedding a single drop of pack blood. When you are treated as a despised, invisible servant for 19 long years, you learn how the real world operates in the shadows. The high lords and noble ladies completely ignored the filthy, lower-class smugglers who operated far beneath their arrogant notice. But those dangerous, shadow-dwelling merchants had been my only reliable source of basic survival for countless years. I calmly asked Harrison's intimidating, heavily scarred beater to escort me immediately down to the estate's hidden outer service gates. The highly trained elite guards looked deeply confused by my request, but they followed my strict orders without any hesitation. I stood boldly in the freezing, biting winter wind and sent out a very specific, low-frequency wolf call into the dark trees. It was a secret, strictly forbidden signal used only by the desperate outcasts and the underground black market traders. Within tense moments, dozens of rough, deeply dangerous-looking wolves slowly emerged from the dense, snow-covered forest. They were the forgotten dregs of our society, leading massive wooden sleds pulled by enormous, heavily muscled draft horses. They did not bow respectfully to the Alpha's heavily armed elite guards, they only bared their yellow teeth in open, aggressive defiance. But when their ruthless, heavily scarred leader saw my bandaged, bruised face, his hostile expression instantly transformed into shock. He clearly recognized me as the quiet, starving girl who used to bravely trade stolen bread for scraps of healing herbs in the dark alleys. I stepped confidently forward, completely unafraid of his wild, unpredictable nature and his intimidating gang of thieves. I did not speak to him with the arrogant, commanding, polished tone of high-born, wealthy nobility. I spoke directly to him using the harsh, guttural, secret slang of the forgotten shadow packs. I boldly offered his entire crew a highly lucrative, exclusive winter trading contract directly with the Alpha's central estate. I solemnly promised them safe passage, extremely fair gold, and absolute protection from the corrupt, greedy Council of Elders. Harrison silently emerged from the deep shadows of the heavy stone gates to watch the unbelievable scene completely unfold. He watched in absolute awe as a scarred, physically fragile girl effortlessly commanded a ruthless band of hardened criminal smugglers. Within one incredibly busy hour, massive tons of fresh meat, heavy coal, and warm blankets were flowing steadily into the freezing estate. The starving, terrified servants wept with pure, unfiltered joy, chanting my name softly in the bustling, newly warmed courtyards. I had completely bypassed the arrogant noble embargo and secured our survival using the very invisible people the nobility deeply despised. Later that quiet evening, the massive master bedroom was beautifully warm and bright from a roaring, crackling fire in the stone hearth. I stood nervously near the warm flames, the flickering orange light dancing softly across my heavily bandaged left cheek. Harrison approached me incredibly slowly, his piercing storm-grey eyes completely stripped of their usual cold, terrifying military hardness. He looked down at me with a profound, earth-shattering level of absolute worship and undeniable devotion. He did not just see a fragile mate he needed to violently protect from the cruel world anymore. He saw a brilliant, incredibly cunning equal who possessed the true strength and intellect to rightfully rule by his side. He reached carefully into the inner pocket of his tailored suit and pulled out a heavy, ancient, gleaming silver ring. It was the legendary, highly coveted lunar signet, a sacred artifact that granted absolute financial and strategic control over the entire territory. He gently took my trembling left hand and smoothly slid the cold, heavy silver onto my delicate finger. "You did not just save my people from freezing today, Amelia," he murmured softly, his deep, rumbling voice thick with raw, unchecked emotion. "You undeniably proved that the greatest, most vital strength in this territory does not come from a pristine face or an arrogant, pure bloodline." He slowly raised his large, calloused hands and gently cupped my face, his thumbs resting meticulously just beneath my deep, healing wounds. "It comes from a brilliant, unbreakable, profoundly beautiful mind." He leaned down slowly, his tall, incredibly powerful frame completely and protectively enveloping my much smaller one. His warm lips softly, deeply, and reverently touched mine for the very first time since I arrived at his home. It was not a desperate, aggressive, or hurried kiss born merely of primal, uncontrollable animal lust. It was a devastatingly tender, incredibly profound promise of eternal partnership, deep respect, and unyielding, fierce devotion. My breath violently hitched in my chest as a powerful, overwhelming wave of pure, undeniable heat swept rapidly through my trembling body. I melted completely against his solid, fiercely muscular chest, finally shedding the very last, heavy layer of my ancient, suffocating fear. The terrible, agonizing pain of my abusive past was completely burned away in an instant by the consuming, brilliant fire of his absolute love. I knew in my very soul that no matter what storms Caroline or the elders planned next, I was finally untouchable. The Grand Winter Solstice Summit was the most crucial diplomatic event in the entire Northern Territories. Lord Thorne and the corrupt Council of Elders had deliberately invited the most arrogant, powerful alphas from all the neighboring lands. Their malicious plan was incredibly simple yet utterly devastating to our fragile political stability. They fully intended to use this highly public international stage to mock my ruined face. They firmly believed that the visiting leaders would refuse to form vital military alliances with an alpha who chose a disfigured, low-born mate. They heavily expected Harrison to face immense international pressure to publicly reject me for the good of his people. They foolishly assumed I would cower in the master bedroom, weeping bitterly behind locked doors and thick velvet curtains. They severely underestimated the survivor who had already conquered the darkest, coldest cellars of their cruel society. I stood confidently before the massive antique mirror in our private chambers, completely refusing to wear a single concealing veil. The deep lacerations on my left cheek had finally healed into raised, jagged lines that told a brutal story of my survival. I calmly instructed my trusted maids to carefully trace those raised scars with crushed, shimmering gold dust. The brilliant gold beautifully caught the soft candlelight, transforming my ugly wounds into a stunning, undeniable badge of ultimate victory. I wore a breathtaking, sweeping gown woven entirely from heavy dark silver silk and rich midnight velvet. Alpha Harrison stepped into the dressing room, his massive, incredibly tall frame dominating the space instantly. He was dressed in pitch-black formal military attire that perfectly highlighted his terrifying, undefeated physical strength. His neatly trimmed short hair gave him an absolutely lethal, commanding edge that made my breath hitch in my throat. He stopped entirely dead in his tracks, his storm grey eyes widening considerably as he took in my bold, unapologetic appearance. He absolutely did not see a broken girl desperately trying to hide her physical flaws from a cruel, judging world. He clearly saw a fierce, untouchable queen entirely prepared to wage a sophisticated war against his greatest political enemies. He crossed the room with heavy, deliberate strides and gently kissed the golden scars adorning my left cheek. His deep, rumbling voice vibrated wonderfully against my skin as he promised to mercilessly slaughter anyone who dared to disrespect me tonight. A suffocating, tense silence instantly fell over the grand ballroom as the heavy oak doors swung open to announce our arrival. Hundreds of visiting foreign dignitaries and hostile noble lords turned to stare at us with completely undisguised shock. Harrison did not rush or falter, he kept my small hand secured firmly on his heavily muscled, unyielding arm. We slowly descended the sweeping marble staircase together, projecting an absolutely united, impenetrable front against their silent judgment. Lord Thorne stood near the centre banquet table, his aging face twisting into an ugly, bitter sneer as we approached the crowd. He loudly and disrespectfully addressed a visiting warlord, making a cruel, pointed comment about my striking golden scars. He boldly claimed that the Northern Territories had grown dangerously weak if they allowed a damaged, former servant to act as their ruling Luna. The visiting Alpha laughed a harsh, booming laugh, clearly preparing to formally challenge Harrison's ultimate authority over the regional alliance. I absolutely did not wait for my fiercely protective mate to draw his sword and start a bloody, catastrophic international incident. I smoothly stepped forward, my voice incredibly calm, freezing cold, and carrying effortlessly across the dead silent room. I completely refused to defend my physical appearance or offer any pathetic apologies for my lack of aristocratic breeding. Instead, I gracefully withdrew a thick stack of sealed, heavily perfumed letters from the hidden silk pocket of my velvet gown. I had meticulously acquired these highly treasonous documents through the very underground smuggling network I had established during the brutal winter blockade. I calmly read the undeniable, written proof that Lord Thorne and the elders had secretly promised our northern border territories to this exact visiting warlord. They had cowardly planned a massive, bloody invasion to overthrow Harrison, using my supposed physical weakness as their pathetic, manufactured excuse. The visiting Alpha's harsh laughter died instantly, his face draining of all color as his secret, treacherous betrayal was exposed to the entire room. Lord Thorne physically stumbled backward, his trembling knees knocking together in absolute, mind-shattering terror as I systematically destroyed his entire life's work. I clearly and loudly articulated every single detail of their financial bribes, hidden troop movements, and cowardly assassination plots. I undeniably proved to every single foreign leader in the room that the true weakness of the North lay with the corrupt, greedy nobleman, not the Alpha's mate. The visiting dignitaries immediately backed far away from Thorne, desperately trying to distance themselves from a fully exposed, failed treason. They quickly and terrifyingly realized that the scarred woman standing before them possessed a brilliant intelligence network far superior to any standing army. Harrison stepped forcefully forward, his terrifying, dominant presence absolutely suffocating the panicked, hyperventilating traitors. He did not even need to raise his deep, gravelly voice to command the immediate, forceful arrest of the entire Council of Elders. His elite guards swiftly dragged the screaming, pathetic, sobbing nobleman out of the grand ballroom in heavy iron chains. The visiting Alphas quickly bowed their heads in deep, terrifying submission, formally swearing their absolute loyalty to our newly solidified, undeniable power. The grand ballroom, completely purged of its toxic traitors, suddenly felt incredibly light and beautifully vibrant once again. Harrison turned fully to me, completely ignoring the hundreds of kneeling, terrified wolves surrounding us in the massive hall. He gently took my hand, his intense storm-grey eyes burning with a level of absolute worship that made my soul ache with pure joy. He smoothly pulled me into the exact center of the polished marble floor as the terrified musicians desperately began to play a slow, romantic waltz. We danced gracefully in the center of the quiet room, completely and utterly victorious over the dark, suffocating shadows of my past. Every single noble lady in the room openly stared at my golden scars, absolutely no longer seeing a mark of ugly shame. They only saw the terrifying, magnificent proof of a female who had single-handedly conquered their entire political world without lifting a sword. I rested my tired head against his broad, muscular chest, listening to the steady, powerful, and incredibly soothing rhythm of his heartbeat. He whispered soft, fiercely devoted promises into my hair, vowing that I would never have to fight another political or physical battle alone. I had finally, unequivocally secured my rightful place as the absolute, undisputed ruler of the most powerful territory in the entire world. The glorious aftermath of the Winter Solstice Summit brought an unprecedented era of absolute peace and newfound prosperity to our war-torn territory. The Central Estate was finally and permanently purged of its toxic, deep-rooted corruption once the treacherous Council of Elders and Lord Thorn were chained and thrown into the deepest, darkest dungeons. Alpha Harrison and I spent the following bustling weeks meticulously solidifying our new, highly lucrative trade alliances with the neighboring regions. We worked tirelessly side by side to ensure the secret underground supply lines I had established were permanently integrated into the Pact's official, booming economic infrastructure. To cement our profound, unbreakable connection with the lower-class citizens who had bravely saved us during the brutal winter blockade, we decided to personally oversee the distribution of heavy winter provisions in the desolate outer villages. Riding closely beside my powerful, fiercely devoted mate in a massive, heavily armored royal carriage, I watched the frozen, barren landscape roll past the thick glass windows. I was absolutely no longer a terrified, heavily scarred servant forced to hide in the damp, dark shadows of the grand mansion. I was the undisputed, universally beloved Luna, wrapped wonderfully in a breathtaking, heavy silver fox fur cloak, returning to the very impoverished, freezing streets where I had once desperately begged for my own survival. The destitute outer village was a grim, freezing collection of crumbling wooden shacks, harsh winds, and deep, freezing mud that seemed to swallow all hope. Hundreds of shivering, desperate outcasts and lower-ranking wolves lined up perfectly in the snow, their exhausted, deeply weathered faces lighting up with pure, unfiltered reverence as our royal carriage finally arrived. They absolutely did not look at my golden scars with the cruel disgust or pathetic pity that the arrogant nobles had once shown me. Instead, they bowed their heads in profound, genuine gratitude to the resilient female who had miraculously secured their winter survival. Alpha Harrison stepped out of the warm carriage first, his incredibly tall and strong body commanding absolute, unquestionable respect from the massive, awestruck crowd. The biting winter wind slightly ruffled his neat, practical short hair as he effortlessly and gently lifted me down into the soft snow, keeping a firm, fiercely protective hand resting warmly on the small of my back. He stood like an impenetrable, lethal mountain of muscle beside me as I personally and warmly handed out thick, life-saving wool blankets and heavy sacks of rich, roasted meats to the weeping, immensely grateful families. The rhythmic, profoundly peaceful distribution of the vital supplies was suddenly interrupted by a harsh, pathetic sound of violent scuffling near the very back of the desperate crowd. A filthy, incredibly frail woman was frantically clawing her way through the thick, freezing mud, desperately trying to steal a discarded, dirty crust of stale bread from a starving, terrified child. A towering, heavily scarred pack guard immediately stepped forward to discipline the feral, dangerous thief, grabbing her violently by her matted, dirt-encrusted hair to pull her away. As the struggling, screaming woman's face was forcefully yanked upward toward the pale, bleak winter sunlight, a sharp, involuntary gasp completely caught in my dry throat. Beneath the thick, repulsive layers of foul grime, agonizing purple frostbite, and deep, sickly exhaustion, I instantly recognized the sharp, unmistakable aristocratic bone structure of my wicked older sister. Caroline was completely and utterly unrecognizable from the arrogant, glowing beauty who had cruelly slashed my face and confidently worn my mother's stolen crimson silk gown just a few short weeks ago. Her once beautifully maintained golden hair was now a tangled, filthy bird's nest of grease and dirt, and her delicate, wealthy hands were heavily cracked and actively bleeding from raw, unforgiving manual labor. She froze completely, her entire frail body trembling violently, when her wide, deeply sunken eyes finally locked onto my heavily protected, radiant figure standing safely on the raised wooden distribution platform. The absolute shock and devastating, mind-shattering horror that rapidly crashed across her filthy, ruined face was a visceral, deeply satisfying testament to her profound, inescapable downfall. She looked desperately at my luxurious, incredibly warm silver fox fur, the heavy, gleaming lunar signet ring catching the bright sunlight on my delicate finger, and the beautiful, meticulous gold dust highlighting the scars she had maliciously given me. Then, her terrified, bloodshot gaze slowly shifted upward to the terrifyingly handsome, immensely powerful alpha who was currently watching her with a level of pure, freezing disgust that could easily shatter solid stone. Caroline suddenly broke free from the massive guard's rough grip, letting out a hysterical, broken, agonizing sob as she desperately dragged her ruined body through the freezing mud directly toward my pristine leather boots. "Amelia, please, I am begging you," she shrieked wildly, her raw, ruined voice completely stripped of its former arrogant, mocking sweetness and replaced by absolute, pathetic desperation. "Sister, I am freezing to death, I am starving, please forgive me for everything, you have to save me from this unbearable hell." She reached out with her trembling, bloody, dirt-caked fingers, desperately trying to grasp the soft hem of my heavy, expensive winter cloak. Harrison moved with terrifying, blinding, supernatural speed, his massive, heavily muscled legs stepping smoothly and aggressively between us to completely block her pathetic, filthy advance. A low, earth-shattering, demonic growl vibrated deeply within his broad chest, loudly warning her that even touching the dirty snow near my boots would result in her immediate, violent, and highly public death. But I absolutely did not need my fiercely protective mate to banish the pathetic, broken monster crawling desperately in the sludge before me. The very lower-class citizens I had personally fed and saved from the brutal winter blockade suddenly surged forward with pure, collective, and righteous fury to protect their beloved Luna. Without a single spoken order from the Alpha, dozens of the poorest, most fiercely loyal wolves formed an impenetrable, highly aggressive physical wall between me and my screaming, wretched sister. They aggressively shoved Caroline backward into the freezing, deep sludge, spitting on her ragged, filthy clothes and loudly cursing the cruel, fallen noblewoman who had once treated them worse than diseased, dying rats. She was utterly and completely rejected by the very lowest caste of our entire society, forever cementing her agonizing, inescapable fate as a despised outcast in the frozen, unforgiving wastelands. I stood incredibly still, looking down at the sobbing, broken woman thrashing wildly in the deep mud, completely waiting for a sudden surge of sibling pity or a familiar wave of agonizing, historical fear to hit me. I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, liberating, beautiful emptiness regarding her miserable, pathetic existence and her desperate pleas for mercy. I did not order her bloody execution, nor did I offer her a single, tiny crumb of my hard-earned mercy, food, or forgiveness to ease her immense suffering. I simply turned my back on her entirely, completely erasing her dark memory and her former terrifying power over my life with one smooth, deeply indifferent, elegant motion. Harrison immediately wrapped his incredibly strong, warm, protective arm tightly around my shaking shoulders, pressing a fiercely proud, intensely loving kiss directly onto the golden scars of my left cheek. We walked calmly and victoriously back to our warm, waiting carriage, entirely leaving Caroline to drown eternally in the bitter, agonizing, and completely deserved consequences of her own unimaginable cruelty. The harsh, biting winds of the brutal winter finally began to surrender to the gentle, thawing warmth of an early spring. The massive central estate, once a terrifying fortress of cold stone and much darker secrets, now felt like a genuine, vibrant sanctuary filled with deep laughter and profound peace. I stood alone by the grand balcony doors, watching the bright morning sunlight pierce sharply through the deep, contrasting shadows of the heavy velvet curtains. This striking, high-contrast light beautifully illuminated the vast, blooming gardens below, entirely washing away the lingering, suffocating memories of the dark, freezing cellar that had once been my entire world. My reflection in the polished glass no longer showed a frightened, battered servant girl trembling in the absolute dark. Instead, it revealed a confident, powerful Luna, her dark silver gown catching the brilliant light, and her golden scars worn proudly as an undeniable testament to her fierce survival. The territory was finally safe, the corrupt traitors were permanently banished to the frozen wastelands, and the lower-class citizens were thriving under our new, compassionate rule. A familiar, incredibly soothing scent of fresh winter pine and rich earth enveloped my heightened senses long before I consciously felt his powerful presence behind me. Alpha Harrison wrapped his massive, heavily muscled arms securely around my waist, pulling my back flush against his broad, impossibly strong chest. His neat, military-style short hair brushed softly against the delicate crook of my neck as he leaned down to press a tender, lingering kiss to my warm skin. Even in the profound quiet of our private chambers, his tall, physically dominant frame radiated a fierce, undeniable wave of absolute protection and consuming, pure love. He gently turned me around to face him, his intense storm-gray eyes completely devoid of the terrifying, ruthless military commander the rest of the entire world deeply feared. Right now, he was simply my devoted mate, a man who looked at my scarred face as if I were the most breathtaking, precious miracle the universe had ever created. The high priests have finished preparing the sacred clearing in the ancestral woods, Harrison murmured softly, his deep, gravelly voice vibrating beautifully through my very bones. Today was absolutely not another brutal political trial or a dangerous, bloody public battle against hostile, arrogant noblemen. Today was the designated occasion of our official, spiritual soul binding, an ancient, profoundly intimate ceremony where our inner wolves would eternally intertwine their pulsing life forces. Unlike the terrifying, highly public rites of the past, this sacred ceremony was strictly private, meant only for true destined mates to completely bare their vulnerable souls to the ancient forest spirits. I reached up and gently traced the hard, unyielding lines of his aristocratic jaw, my heart overflowing with a pure, overwhelming wave of absolute, grounding gratitude. He had blindly chosen a ruined, bleeding outcast from a dirty cellar, and in return, I had helped him completely rebuild his broken kingdom into a magnificent, untouchable empire. We walked together into the deeply ancient, heavily shadowed woods, entirely leaving the grand stone mansion and the bustling, noisy pack members far behind us. The ancient clearing was a breathtaking, secluded sanctuary filled with massive, towering pine trees and soft, glowing emerald moss that felt like rich velvet beneath our bare feet. Beams of intense, brilliant sunlight broke sharply through the thick, dark canopy above, creating a stunning, high-contrast mosaic of dazzling, piercing light and deep, protective shadows across the forest floor. In the very center of the quiet clearing, we knelt together on the soft earth, completely shedding our heavy aristocratic titles and our formal, restrictive royal clothing. We were absolutely no longer the terrifying Alpha and the cunning Luna commanding a vast, powerful military territory. We were simply two raw, deeply connected souls seeking pure, eternal unity. Harrison gently took both of my trembling hands in his incredibly large, heavily calloused ones, his stormy grey eyes locking onto mine with a fierce, burning intensity that rapidly stole the very breath from my lungs. As we softly recited the ancient, sacred vows of the eternal pack, a sudden, magnificent surge of pure, warm, golden energy violently rushed through my racing veins. It was a profound, earth-shattering spiritual connection, allowing me to fully and completely feel the immense, echoing depth of his pure love, his fierce loyalty, and his lingering, deeply hidden fears of ever losing me. My inner wolf joyously sang a wild, triumphant song, rushing forward to eternally embrace his powerful, majestic spirit in the warm, blinding light of our shared, unified consciousness. In that perfect, suspended moment in time, every single lingering nightmare of my abusive past was completely and permanently incinerated by the consuming, brilliant fire of our absolute, unbroken emotional bond. As the intense, rushing spiritual energy slowly faded into a beautiful, deeply comforting warmth, Harrison carefully pulled me into his massive lap, holding me against his broad, impossibly strong chest as if I were his very heartbeat. He gently brushed a stray lock of hair away from my face, his calloused thumb meticulously and reverently tracing the raised, intricate golden scars on my left cheek in the bright sunlight. "We have conquered our enemies and completely secured our northern borders," he whispered fiercely, his deep voice surprisingly thick with raw, unchecked, and overwhelming emotion that he only ever showed to me. "But my greatest, most important victory, the only true legacy I genuinely care about leaving behind in this world, is the beautiful, unbreakable, safe life we are going to build together right here." I rested my tired head against his muscular shoulder, looking out into the beautifully sunlit forest, completely enveloped in his absolute safety. I finally realized that the desperate, terrified girl locked in the dark cellar had not just survived the vicious, cruel monsters of her past. She had completely conquered the suffocating darkness, claimed the ultimate, blinding light, and gracefully become the undeniable, fiercely loved, and incredibly powerful queen of her entire world. Countless seasons had gracefully turned since the brutal, unforgiving winter that once violently threatened to completely destroy our beloved, expanding territory. The grand central estate was absolutely no longer a cold, imposing, and terrifying fortress filled with treacherous whispers, arrogant noblemen, and dark, hidden secrets. Instead, it had miraculously blossomed into a breathtaking, incredibly vibrant sanctuary of absolute peace, echoing daily with the joyous, uninhibited laughter of our thriving, unified pack members. I stood peacefully on the sweeping, ornate stone balcony overlooking the magnificent, endlessly blooming gardens, basking luxuriously in the warm, golden, and profoundly healing light of the late afternoon sun. The deep, heavy, and terrifying shadows that had once completely consumed my entire miserable existence in that freezing, forgotten underground cellar now felt like a distant, faded nightmare belonging to an entirely different, past lifetime. My clear reflection in the tall, polished glass doors revealed a serene, fiercely confident, and undeniably powerful Luna. The beautiful, intricate golden scars on my left cheek still shone brilliantly and proudly as a permanent, undeniable testament to my ultimate, hard-fought survival and ultimate victory over cruelty. The secret, desperate underground supply lines I had bravely established during the terrifying blockade had entirely transformed into flourishing, highly lucrative, and legitimate trade routes. These routes now brought unprecedented, incredible wealth and vital stability to the very lowest, previously forgotten castes of our entire society. The common people absolutely did not fear my presence, they genuinely worshipped the very ground I walked on, not because I was born to an arrogant, high title, but because I had bravely bled and fiercely fought alongside them in the freezing, bitter mud. A sudden, delightful, and incredibly sweet squeal instantly drew my full, divided attention away from the peaceful, sprawling landscape and directly back into the comforting warmth of our massive, sunlit master bedroom. Alpha Harrison was sitting comfortably and casually on the very edge of our sprawling, luxurious silk bed. His exceptionally tall, heavily muscled, and intimidatingly powerful frame looked wonderfully and entirely out of place as he gently, meticulously cradled our tiny, fragile newborn daughter against his broad, completely unyielding chest. His neat, practical, and highly disciplined short hair caught the bright, dancing sunlight as he looked down at the delicate, peacefully sleeping infant with a level of pure, earth-shattering, and absolute devotion that completely melted my racing heart. The most terrifying, deeply feared, an entirely undefeated military commander in the entire Northern Territories, was currently completely captivated and thoroughly disarmed by a fragile, tiny new life. His intense, storm-grey eyes, which usually promised swift, brutal death to our enemies, had completely softened into beautiful pools of immense, fiercely protective, and unconditional warmth. I walked slowly and gracefully across the plush, expensive carpets, a profound, overwhelming, and deeply spiritual wave of pure, absolute gratitude washing over my healing soul as I joined my beautiful, perfect family. Our incredibly sweet, beautiful daughter slowly opened her bright, curious, and innocent eyes, suddenly reaching up a tiny, incredibly soft, and clumsy hand to bat curiously at the warm air. Harrison carefully and incredibly gently guided her delicate, tiny fingers directly toward my smiling face, allowing her to softly and innocently trace the raised, shimmering golden lines of the scars marking my cheek. She absolutely did not cry, flinch, or pull away in primal fear. She simply cooed softly, completely mesmerized and thoroughly delighted by the beautiful, bright gold that fundamentally represented the fierce, unbreakable, and ancient strength of her mother. She will never, ever know the suffocating, terrifying darkness or the cruel, biting cold that we were forcefully made to conquer, Harrison murmured fiercely. His deep, rumbling, and incredibly powerful voice was thick with an absolute, unyielding, and violent promise to securely protect this innocent future generation. She will only ever know a beautiful world of brilliant, enduring light, absolute, unwavering safety, and the magnificent, deeply powerful legacy of a true, fierce queen who absolutely refused to be broken by monsters. He leaned forward, his massive, calloused hand gently cupping my jaw as he pressed a deep, profoundly loving, and eternal kiss to my forehead. Later that beautifully mild, completely clear evening, the entire, unified territory gathered enthusiastically in the grand, extensively illuminated outdoor courtyard to formally and joyously celebrate the highly anticipated birth of the Alpha's rightful, strong heir. There were absolutely no arrogant, corrupt, and treacherous noblemen whispering cruel, deadly plots in the dark, hidden corners of the estate. Furthermore, there were absolutely no terrified, freezing, and starving servants begging desperately and pathetically for tiny scraps of discarded, moldy bread. The incredibly diverse, completely unified, and profoundly healthy crowd looked up at our standing family with profound, genuine, and unfiltered reverence. Their incredibly joyous, deafening cheers completely shook the ancient, heavy stone foundations of the magnificent, historical estate. Thousands of glowing, beautifully crafted paper lanterns were simultaneously released into the incredibly clear, star-filled, and peaceful night sky, physically carrying the bright hopes and secure dreams of a unified, completely liberated, and thriving pack. The hired musicians enthusiastically played joyous, incredibly lively, and fast-paced folk songs, entirely replacing the rigid, suffocating, and incredibly boring classical waltzes previously preferred by the permanently banished, cruel aristocracy. I leaned comfortably and entirely securely against Harrison's incredibly strong, immovable, and heavily armored body, deeply feeling the steady, reassuring, and immensely powerful rhythm of his heartbeat echoing directly and intimately within my own chest. He wrapped his massive, fiercely protective, and unyielding arms securely and tightly around my waist, proudly pressing a fiercely passionate, infinitely tender, and highly visible kiss directly to my golden scars in front of the entire, wildly cheering, and adoring world. Looking out over the vast, profoundly peaceful, and incredibly prosperous kingdom we had meticulously, painfully, and successfully built entirely together, I finally and completely understood the true, profound, and beautiful meaning of my arduous, agonizing journey. The wicked, unforgiving cruelty of my dark past had violently and maliciously attempted to entirely strip away my physical beauty and completely crush my innocent spirit. However, it had only successfully managed to forge an unbreakable, brilliant, and deeply resilient soul utterly capable of confidently leading a magnificent, powerful empire. I was absolutely no longer just the scarred, forgotten, and pathetic girl cowering helplessly in the terrifying shadows. I was the undeniable, radiant, and fiercely loved heart of the entire North, forever and eternally bound to a magnificent mate who deeply worshipped every single broken, mended piece of me. Our beautiful, epic story of profound suffering and ultimate, undeniable redemption was now permanently and indelibly woven into the very historical fabric of the territory, serving as a shining, golden, and eternal legend that would inspire countless, unborn generations.